to Mary, and she can send that out as needed. How does that sound? Good.
So
okay.
YouTube channel that we could put it on.
If we have a place to post it.
Okay, we'll send you the link, and you can figure out how to disperse it with everybody. Okay. Sounds good. All right, I am going to mute everybody. I apologize. It is not because I don't want to hear your lovely voices. It's so we can put the focus on our host here. All right, so hello everyone, I'm Sarah. I am the education manager here at San Diego Botanic Garden, and I'm just going to be behind the scenes, but I wanted to hop on for a few logistical things for you. And that's first off to thank you for being here. We're really lucky actually that you can join us virtually. I know that's kind of a silver lining right now that we can be coordinated, involved with people from all over. So we're really excited. You're for our first out-of-state tour. So thank you. So logistics for this evening's tours, we are going to, like I said, mute everybody, and we're going to use the main chat function. So if you think of a question throughout, if you can locate the chat, if you haven't before, depending on what you're using, it's usually down at the bottom. If you go to your taskbar down at the bottom, it'll say chat. And so you can type in your questions there. And like Jeff said, he's going to be monitoring them, and we'll have a time at the end where we will be answering your questions. And if we don't get to your questions, we'll compile the list of them and make sure it gets to you so we can answer the questions for you. Okay. And then also, some of you have your videos on right now. We do often notice that because we're going to be playing some videos of our garden, that if you have your video off, it will actually make the playback better. Some people experience some internet issues. So we just want to give you the best chance possible to see these videos. All right. And then lastly, I wanted to introduce our awesome docents that are participating in this tour tonight. We have Jeff, who you've already spoken with, who is the chair of our docent and volunteer program and also leads our docent training program. So if that doesn't make him one of the most knowledgeable people at the garden, I'm not sure what it makes. And then we also have Kay, who is going to be featured in one of our videos. She's a superstar, and Kay has been here a very long time. So we are lucky to have her as a representative of the garden. But Jeff has more of an introduction about Kay, and I will leave the floor to them. So thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. So welcome. On behalf of the San Diego Botanic Garden, we're really thrilled. I am the current chair of the Docent and Volunteer Program Group and the Docent Training Coordinator. And really the reason they like me a lot there is because I volunteered more hours than anyone else. So that's all it is to it. I think I did 850 hours at the garden last year. Not that I'm counting, but it is my favorite place. I tell people that it's my Disneyland, and I do enjoy it. So today we're going to start off, we're going to have a video done by Mo Price. Mo Price is a docent since 2001. She's quite the expert on Mediterranean climate plants. She has a particular interest in Proteaceae. And so Mo's going to talk to us about Proteaceae. Mo's also a master gardener here in San Diego County, as am I. And we will listen to her video first. If you have questions, please again use the chat function. And then I will, at the end of that video, we will look at those questions and then try to answer those for you between Kay and myself. And then we will move on to Kay's presentation on California Natives, which probably you all are so interested in, being for Virginia Native Plant Society. And I'll do more of an introduction for her, for Kay at that point. So if there's no questions, we'll go ahead and start. And Sarah, if you'll roll Mo Price's video. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for visiting the gardens today. My name is Mo Price. I'm a docent at San Diego Botanic Garden. I'm delighted that you're here, and I hope to give you a very informative and educational tour. So, when I was here a couple of weeks ago thinking about what to talk about, I was asked to talk about South African or Australian plants. And I looked around, and a lot of the plants that were blooming were in the Proteaceae family. And I said, maybe rather than talk about a number of different plants, why don't I focus on the Proteaceae family? So that's what I'm going to do today. So we'll look at 5 different plants in the Proteaceae family. But first, just a little bit of history about where this Proteaceae family is native to. 800 million years ago, there was a supercontinent named Gondwana. It split into 3 continents, those being Australia, South America, and Africa. And the interesting thing was, 800 years ago, before this continent split, there were Proteaceae on that continent. When it split into 3 continents, the Proteaceae, a few of them went to each continent, but because of evolution, they all became very different plants in their own continent. So, as you'll see, in South Africa, we have the Proteas. In Australia, we have things like the Banksias and the Grevilleas. And South America really didn't get many plants. South America got 10% of the plants, Australia got 60%, and South Africa got 30%. So we'll go and take a look at those plants. But while I'm standing here in front of these bird of paradise, I just can't help but say one thing about the bird of paradise. Incredible plant. It's from South Africa. Many of us seem to think it's from Australia, but no, it's from South Africa. And there's a very interesting thing about this. Normally, when you see plants, they get flowers on them, they get pollinated, and then they get fruit on them. Have you ever seen fruit on a bird of paradise? Not very often. The reason is, if you think about how bird of paradise get pollinated here, it gets pollinated by hummingbirds. And what do hummingbirds do? They're little helicopters, right? They don't set their feet down on the plant. So they suck some nectar way out of this portion of the plant, way down in here, and they get their nectar. And then they fly off. The difference is, in South Africa, the bird of paradise is pollinated by a sunbird. And you know what the sunbird does? The sunbird comes here, it sits its little feet down right on the plant, and look at my finger. That's pollen. It takes that pollen and it goes to another plant. And that's why they have fruit on the bird of paradise and we don't have them here. The only thing is, you can do this with a paintbrush yourself. Get this pollen and move it from one to another. So if you see a bird of paradise with fruit here, it may be because someone pollinated. Tasty. Let's look at some of the plants. Okay, here we are at our first member of the Proteaceae family. This particular plant is called a Banksia, and it's native to Australia. Banksia was named after Sir Joseph Banks. Perhaps you've heard of him. He was an explorer, and he was a horticulturist, and he did more for horticulture than I ever imagined, until I read about him. But this plant, the Banksia, and this one here is probably about 20 years old. It's advertised to get to be about 4 feet by 4 feet. I would say this one is a good 10 feet wide by probably 5 or 6 feet high, so they do get pretty big. It's called Banksia spinulosa. The word spinulosa is a Latin word, the species name, and it has to do with these what we call spines on the Banksia. They look like they might be rough, but they're really smooth, easy to touch, they don't hurt your fingers. So it's called Banksia spinulosa. The common name for this plant is hairpin Banksia because these are called styles, the male portion of the plant. If you can see, they kind of curl over. Do you remember the days when we used to have those black hairpins that we put in our hair many, many years ago? People said they looked like hairpins. That's why this got named, the common name, hairpin Banksia. I have one of these at home. They are so interesting to watch. In around May, they start putting out a flower, and a very tiny little shoot comes up, much smaller than, remember those corn cob things, the miniature corn cob things that you used to get in buffets at restaurants? Remember what those look like? Well, imagine one a little smaller, and it starts growing. Pretty soon it looks like one of those corn cobs, and 5-6 months later, we've got this beautiful Banksia flower. Quite incredible. And the thing about them is, this is the fall. They bloom in the fall and winter. So when a lot of other things have gone dormant, the Banksias are blooming. They're fall and winter blooming, as are many of the Australian and South African plants. So this Banksia has some interesting uses. This is a seed pod from a Banksia. Not this one, but a Banksia grandis. Grandis is kind of defines the Banksia. It's a big, and it's got a big flower and big seed pods. So what is so special about this? The thing about Banksias are these seed pods, if you want to open them, typically in Australia where they grow, they're opened by fires. You've heard about the fires roaming through Australia, burning everything. Well, the seed pods that are on the ground will open in a fire. So the seed pods open and new Banksias sprout after the fire. So silly me, I was at home and I thought, well, I want to get the seed pods out of this. What should I do? And first I took a hammer and a chisel and tried to open this up, to no avail. Then I finally said, duh, put it in the oven, 400 degrees, half hour. The darn thing opened up, and you could get at the seeds. Incredible. This has another use, actually. Do we have anyone out there who has a wood lathe? You can take one of these, put it on your wood lathe, turn it, and you will eventually get something that looks like this. Now, I did this one, and I'm not very accomplished at this, but people who really know what they're doing could make small wooden vases. In Australia, they make Christmas ornaments out of these Banksias. Pretty interesting plant. So that's the Banksia spinulosa, one of my favorite, easy to grow. And I'll talk a little more about how you grow Proteaceae after we look at another plant or two. So, shall we move on? Let's look at a Proteaceae. And here we are standing in front of a beautiful Protea flower. This plant is called Protea. By the way, you can say Protea, Protea. You say tomato, I say tomato. It doesn't matter. So here we are standing in front of a beautiful Protea flower. Actually, it's not a flower, it's an inflorescence. This beautiful coloring that you see, the coloring here, that is not a flower, those are bracts. And that is the beautiful part of the Protea that you see that gives it its color. This is the most widely sold Protea in the world. And it is probably the easiest to grow. It gets to be about 10 feet tall by 10 feet wide, and you can easily prune it back a bit if it's too big. So the interesting thing about this is an inflorescence. I have one here. This is an inflorescence. And you can see, like if you look inside this one here, a different one, you can actually see every one of those little needle-like things is a flower. Very interesting, huh? So we've got hundreds of flowers inside this one little bract. So it blooms, again, it blooms in the fall through maybe January, which is really nice. And then it starts to fade. And when it fades, it kind of starts losing its color like this one. And it loses more of a color. It starts to curl up. And it looks kind of brown. Not real pretty. And you know, You don't need to deadhead these. Deadhead means cutting flowers off, old flowers off. You don't need to deadhead them, but they will produce more if you do take the spent flowers off. It's pretty easy, you know. You don't need scissors. You just take it, you grab that little puppy. It's gone. So that's how I deadhead my proteas, because if I had snippers, who knows what I'd cut. So that's what happens. Now, oh, you saw I just threw that protea flower, inflorescence. It landed on the ground somewhere. That's what they do. They land on the ground. And then they kind of open up little by little. And you can see these are seed pods. These are seeds. You can plant these and they will grow. So these are all of the seeds. And what happens is these are the seeds. They fall on the ground. I leave them there on the ground because they're excellent mulch. And actually, I have a number of volunteers in my garden from these seeds that are laying on the ground. So good mulch and you get more flowers. But the interesting thing is these seeds were all in this little, these are the bracts. These were the colorful bracts that you see here. They open up. Those are the seeds. And then, if you look at this, the inside of this bract where I pulled the seeds out of, look at what you see. You see this spiral. Is that interesting or what? That's a mathematical formula that is used to calculate the spiral. If you've ever heard of the Fibonacci is the person who figured this out. So the protea has that beautiful pattern. The sunflower also has that beautiful pattern. So interesting thing about the Proteaceae. You can just take them, the spent flower, pop them off, and throw them on the ground. And you may get new flowers. One more thing. This protea flower, really different than the first one, is called a white repens. And it's native, of course, to South Africa. And the interesting thing about it is, if you turn it upside down, sometimes you'll get some nectar that comes out of it. So it was almost harvested to extinction in South Africa. And the funny thing about this one, I've got these growing all over my garden now. It's so easy to grow seeds and get volunteers. I took 3 of these to a garden club meeting one day to give to the hostess. And they looked really beautiful. And I walked away and I heard the ladies say to each other, "I think they're artificial." It was so funny. I'll never forget that. Protea white repens. Okay, let's move on. Hello again. This plant is called an Adenanthus serinceus. Common name, woolly bush. Does it look like it's prickly? Oh, just kidding. It's soft. It's soft. Serinceus means silky. Do you believe this is another member of the Proteaceae family? But it doesn't have the beautiful flowers that the other proteas have. What it gets is tiny, tiny little red, inconspicuous flowers that you can barely see sometimes. But it is a very interesting plant, pretty adaptable, and it's used in Australia, and also they grow it in Israel, and they use it in bouquets for cut flowers. In Australia, it's also used, guess what? December is coming. Any ideas what they use this plant for? Show them how big it is, Sarah. It's used for Christmas trees in Australia. Can you believe it? So interesting plant. If you have one, you'll probably be the only one in your area that has one. You don't see too many of them. So let's talk about planting. When you plant your proteas, where do you plant them? You want to give them plenty of room to breathe. Don't crowd them. You know, I've been growing proteas since about 2004. I have never had a problem with insects or anything at all. I give them plenty of room. They like to breathe. They like to move their foliage in the breeze. So give them plenty of room. And then how do you water them? How much water do they take? When they're young, you take it out of first of all, the soil. I don't know what kind of soil you have. I have this hard pan that I need to take a jackhammer to break up, and it kind of turns sandy. What you want to do is mix your native soil with peat moss and coarse sand, and then plant your plant right in there. It will be very happy. Proteaceae grew up in continents that had very poor soil, so they do not need any fertilizer. I have never fertilized my proteas. As a matter of fact, their roots kind of spread along the ground, and so if you fertilize around them, you're going to kill the roots and kill the plants. You don't want to till around your proteas. If you see weeds down there, don't take out a hoe. Get down there and pull the weeds the old-fashioned way with your hand, and your protea will be much happier. Actually, I was doing a talk once and I mentioned that, and this woman goes, "That's why my protea died. My gardener had a hoe out there getting rid of the weeds." So you don't want to do that. Water requirements. When they're small, when you just get one in your little 1-gallon pot, if that's what you get, and put it in the ground, twice a week, give it a gallon of water. Once it starts to get established, cut it back to 2 gallons once a week. Water deep and infrequently, and your proteas will be happy. They like growing on slopes so that they have good drainage. Good drainage is very important. The way we kill these plants, like many plants, you know that most of the plants that we kill are due to overwatering. So overwatering will kill these, as will fertilizer will kill these plants. So just be neglectful and they'll be a lot happier. Can you grow one in a pot? Yes, you can grow many of them in pots. I'd start out with a pretty good sized pot and they will grow fine in a pot. Yes, no problem. This plant here is a grevillea. Pretty widespread plant. This one is called Grevillea Peaches and Cream. And what it does when the new flower comes out, like I have here, it comes out predominantly yellow. And then after it ages, the yellow turns to shades of kind of pink and orange and rose. It's a beautiful plant. When I bought my plant, it said 4 by 4, 4 feet by 4 feet. Ha! My plant is at least 10 feet around it pretty much stays at 4 feet tall, but it does get pretty big. I put my plant in the ground, and for 3 years, it just sat there. It didn't do a darn thing. Finally, one day it said, "Good morning." It woke up and it just started growing like mad after 3 years. And the interesting thing about this plant, Grevillea Peaches and Cream, once it starts blooming, it doesn't stop blooming. It blooms year round. I planted it right in my front yard, which is something I normally don't do. I normally don't plant a plant in a good spot, but this one I did. It's right in the front yard. It never stops blooming. The thing you have to get used to with plants that bloom year round, and look at these flowers. I mean, they've got these little stamens. These things are going to fall off and be all over the place. So you've got to get used to the fact that if a plant is blooming year round, it is going to be dropping things on the ground year round. Well, I take advantage of this because I don't like to go to the store to buy mulch. I sweep up the droppings that land where I don't want them. I take them and I use them to put mulch, use them as mulch for my other plants. So great little plant, Grevillea peaches and cream. It was in 1997, it was hybridized with a couple other plants, a couple other Grevilleas, Grevillea superb and Grevillea Robin Gordon. It was hybridized, and it took them 10 years of watching it before they released it. It was released in Australia in 2007, and in 2009, we were fortunate to get this plant here in the United States, and I planted mine in 2010, and like I said, now it's 10 feet by 10 feet and it's still about 4 feet tall. And this thing has got a lot of nectar on it. You will see hummingbirds on it all the time. My hands are sticky now from touching it. The hummingbirds love it. One other thing about planting, I said no fertilizer, right? You might say, well, can I plant this by my California natives? Do you fertilize your California natives? Not if you want them to live, right? So you can plant your Australian plants, your Proteaceae, right next to your California natives. No problems. They have similar water requirements. So just something to know. Another plant. Some people say this plant has the most magnificent flower in the Proteaceae family. It's called Stenocarpus sinuatus. Its leaves, notice its foliage, the green foliage, the leaves, they're pretty serrated, they're kind of interesting, waxy leaves, but they vary even on one plant. You might have leaves that are kind of split like this on one plant. On the plant and on the same plant, you might have leaves that are completely smooth. Pretty interesting, but the most interesting thing is the flower. The flower looks like a wheel. Oh, this here could you are you showing a little one like that? The flower looks like a wheel. You can see the wheel there. This one hasn't opened yet. And as it opens, you see the red stamens, the orange-red stamens around it, and it's just such a beautiful flower. And it's just covered with flowers right now. There's some really pretty ones up there too. So it's called the Stenocarpus sinuatus. It doesn't drop much. Like many of the other proteas that I talked about that dropped a lot, it doesn't drop much. So it's good if you have a pool and you want a tree nearby the pool. This is a good plant to have near your pool. It doesn't drop much. It's kind of a slow grower. You might have it a few years before it sends out its first flowers. So check it out, Stenocarpus sinuatus. Once you see it in bloom, you'll see it all around town. There's quite a few of them around. Interesting plant. And one more thing before. So that concludes my talk about the Proteaceae family. I hope you learned a lot, found it informative and educational. I'm standing in front of another Australian plant right now, the Brachychiton. Very interesting plant. I'm not going to talk much about it today, but what I want to say is these are all Mediterranean plants. The same climate that we have in Southern California, the same Mediterranean climate exists in Australia, in South Africa, and a couple other places in the world. So whatever they can grow, we can grow too. And there are just a plethora of beautiful plants from the Southern Hemisphere that you might enjoy in your garden. So I hope you learned a lot. And if you want to hear a talk on Mediterranean plants, come back and we'll do another talk for you about those plants. So thank you all. Happy gardening. Bye-bye.
That should be Mo's last name, Mo Proteaceae, which is the title of that video. Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed it. I did receive a couple of questions. Luckily for me, two of the questions I didn't know, I had to look up. So I had a chance to do that. But the first question was, did any of these plants end up in the Mediterranean? That's a really good question because there are 5 Mediterranean climate areas around the world. 2 of those are South Africa, and the south and western portion of Australia are counted as 1. The coast of California is a 3rd. The Mediterranean basin obviously is the fourth, and Western Chile is the fifth. So while I don't believe there are any naturally occurring Proteaceae within the Mediterranean specifically, they certainly grow in all 5 Mediterranean climate areas. And Kay, do you have any, would you agree with that, or would you add anything? And you're muted. There you go.
Well, there are differences within Mediterranean climates, so because of altitude and all kinds of things. So automatically, not every plant will necessarily go to every other Mediterranean climate place, but they can be found. You know, it has to be frost-free in a lot of cases because, and so we're talking about coastal areas. And it depends upon altitude also, because a lot of these coastal areas do have mountains, and consequently things that are on higher altitude will take lower temperatures, and those are going to be different plants. But if it's down near the ocean, closer, lower in altitude, then those are different plants, and those probably would have to be frost-free. And so it depends on that.
Okay, thank you. The next question that I received was, what Protea species are crossed to produce the hybrid Protea pink ice that she showed? And I actually looked that up. There's one of the best things if you Google. We have a nursery further north here in California called San Marcos Growers. Interestingly, I live in the city of San Marcos. San Marcos Growers is a totally different place, but they are really wonderful on obviously California native plants as well as Mediterranean climate plants. And according to them, the parents of the pink ice are Protea compacta and Protea Susannae, I think is the way it's spelled, Susannae. So I hope that helps. And again, I would ask those questions of Google, and you'll get a more consistent answer, I think, especially if you look at something like San Marcos Growers is a wonderful resource for that. The next question I had was, what is crossed to produce Grevillea peaches and cream? And that also, again, I went to San Marcos Growers, and I'm looking at it right now. According to that, the parents are Grevillea bipinna fetida. I'm going to completely mess that up. I never took Latin, only what I tried to learn for plant species. And the other parent is Grevillea banksii, interestingly. Oh. And then since we're finishing up talking about Proteaceae, when Mo started her presentation, she's standing with those beautiful birds of paradise. Behind her, there's a very large tree. Interestingly, that tree behind her is Grevillea robusta, which is commonly called a silk oak. And it is clearly looks like, when you look at any of the leaves, it looks like a Grevillea. It's a beautiful tree. It's not a great tree as far as structure. It tends to break apart and stuff, but that tree behind her is probably 70 feet tall. So it's from South Africa, which is an amazing tree. So no other questions. We're going to move on. So now I want to introduce you to Kay Worley. So Kay Worley, I called her this, I have to tell you this. I called her this morning because even though I know her, she's taught California natives, California native plants, native peoples, which is a specific garden we have at the Botanic Garden, and the Fire Safety Garden for many years in our docent training class. And while, as I told her this morning, California natives aren't my favorite because, and she'll tell you a bit about California natives, look really nice after it rains, and the rest of the year they look like the devil. And but Kay is so interesting. She is truly a student of the world. She studied sociology and psychology back earlier in her life. She grew up in Ohio. She's actually a master gardener from Ohio. Then she was part of a military family, and she's lived in Iran and Saudi Arabia and many, many, many other places, and has just a wealth of knowledge on California natives. So we had a lovely talk. We talked for an hour and 10 minutes this morning, and finally said, we have to get off the phones, okay, because otherwise we'll go into our time this afternoon. So without further ado, I'd like to have Sarah start the video for Kay. Please ask your questions in chat, and at the end, Kay will be glad to answer them.
Hello, and welcome to the San Diego Botanic Garden. I'm Kay Worley, and I've been a docent here at the garden for a little over 20 years. I do tours and other activities in the garden. I'm standing in the California Gardenscape, and this is a garden that has water-wise plants. Our water-wise plants are used to our climate here in coastal California, and that is warm, dry summers, which remember, we're seeing this garden in October. And so this is usually a low point for gardens. They've gone through almost 6 months of without any measurable rain. Now, in November, hopefully we'll be starting to get rain. And so we have cool, wet winters. That means we may get 8 to 10 inches. And these plants have adapted to be able to store water, or one thing some of the natives do is they go into a dormancy. And that dormancy consists of they'll bloom and everything else in the springtime, and then they drop their leaves and look really much a lot like a dead plant. Now, not everybody wants that in their home garden. So the plants that I want to show you today are plants that will stay evergreen, will bloom and basically bloom for a long period of time, and are attractive to wildlife, butterflies, birds. So if you want that in your garden, you can have that and also have something that's water-wise, that takes minimal water in order to keep it looking really good. These are some of our buckwheats, and we have probably 4 or 5 different buckwheats in the garden. These are low shrubs. This is a mature height for this, okay? And these are the old seed heads that you can see on here. They would have sort of cream-colored flowers on them, or sometimes they're a light pink. There's even one buckwheat that has sort of rosy red color, and that is called a red buckwheat. Okay, so let's go on down here. So these are all fairly low shrubs, all right? But we have another one over here that is our Orgonium. Orgonium is a scientific name, genus name for buckwheats. And this is Orgonium giganteum. As you can see, it grows a lot larger. This is the mature plant. And this is the regular seed head. Now this would have been covered in white flowers. And so the common name for this is St. Catherine's lace. And it has sort of a lacy appearance to it, especially when the flowers are white. And then it has this seed head. One of the things that California natives are known for is that birds and butterflies are attracted to these plants. So if you want those in your garden, all you have to do is plant these plants and they will come visit. They will find you. If it helps if you leave these seed heads on, because the seeds are an important source for birds in the wintertime. And then in the spring or whatever, when these are basically, these are basically gone. The seeds are gone already. You can cut these off and get ready for the next bloom time. All right. So this is obviously, because of its size, you want to probably put this in the background of your garden so that you can see it, because it's going to bloom obviously at the end of the branches and kind of be over your foreground. You can have something shorter in the foreground. So let's come on down here and put something in the foreground. Look at this one. Look at the color on this. This brilliant green is year-round. This is the Gambilia speciosa. And look at the red flowers. Hummingbirds love these flowers. And this blooms over a huge part of the spring and summer into the fall, sometimes even a little bit in the wintertime. So this is a terrific plant, but it keeps this beautiful green color. And it really shows off well with the gray foliage of your buckwheat and then this brilliant color, all right? So, and this is a mature height for this plant, okay? So let's go on down here. We'll visit some more plants, okay? Okay, we have this one. This is Dudleya Britanniae, and this plant is sometimes called chalk Dudleya. Do you see that? This is a protective coating that are on the leaves. It's sort of a sunscreen for plants, And this is an excellent plant to plant on a hillside because see how this is planted at an angle? Put this down, and you always want to plant it. You don't want it flat up like this. You want it at an angle. The angle keeps water from collecting on the face of it because if that happens, it will rot out and die. So always plant it at an angle like that. And it's a beautiful counterpoint to other plants. This is an epilobium, and this is famous for blooming at this time of the year. Look at those. They say they're red flowers, but that looks orange to me. And this is a great flower to have because its blooming time is late summer through the fall. And so most of your California natives are going to bloom in the springtime. And that's because they've had enough water over the wintertime to put on new growth and have the energy to bloom and set seed. And then they just kind of rest for the rest of the year. And these, they'll keep their foliage, but the bloom time is done. But this one, characteristically, blooms really late. So if you want some color in your garden, the Gambilia is good for you, and also is the epilobium. All right, let's go on down here. If you need a big background plant, a plant that will be a good hedge, this is another one of those huge plants, okay? It's going to get bigger wide than it is tall because it tends to sprawl out. But this is lemonade berry. And lemonade berry has this beautiful green foliage. This is also fire resistant. So if you're worried about fire, especially in a big plant, this would be an excellent one to have. It's going to have tiny, it's in bud right now, but it's going to have tiny pink flowers on it, and then it'll develop a sort of a reddish fruit on it. Neither one are real attention grabbers. It's basically for the foliage and the form that you're looking for on a plant like this, but it's a great one if you want something really large in your garden. This is our toyon. And toyon has these beautiful sort of serrate leaves, and it has tiny bunches of tiny white flowers in the springtime. What's really showy is these are more mature. Look at the color on those. All right. So these are going to have these berries. These haven't changed color yet, but they're going to all be this sort of real rich red. So toyon is one of those really. This is Heteromeles artibutifolia is the scientific name for this. Okay. But it's a really great, and remember, it's fire resistant, both of these. That's really important in our area because you don't want to plant something near your house that is a real fire danger. It doesn't mean that these will not burn. If the fire is hot enough and the wind is strong enough, yes, they will burn, but they resist it. They're not real fire dangers, okay? This is a Palo Verde I gave, and this is my favorite desert tree. We lived in Arizona for a number of years, and these grow in Arizona on the roadside. So if you're inland and you have hotter, drier weather, these will be particularly happy, okay, because that's what their native region. I love them because they have a very delicate look to them, and they have these beautiful yellow flowers. You see those? This is a variety known as Desert Museum, and it is thornless. The species type of Parkinsonia has nasty thorns on it, which help protect it, because these plants, being in a native area, they've sort of got all kinds of strategies for survival out here. And one of them is to have really sharp thorns, prickers, barbs, spines, to discourage something from eating it. And so this is a little bit of a more domesticated tree. If you live on the coast, one of the things it does get is mildew, because it's not used to having to deal with a lot of moisture in the air. And the mildew can make the leaves look a little funny, but then when it dries out, they have this gorgeous green color on them. Okay. I think of a fairly small tree. I read someplace you can get to like 20 feet, but most of the ones that I see are more like topping out at like 15. So it's not a huge, it's not some 60-foot tree, all right? Okay, this is another one of our native plants. This is an Encilia. This is the Encilia californica, and it has these yellow daisies. Now, it has a tremendous bloom in the springtime, and then the rest of the year, it's sort of a sporadic kind of bloom. But it has these green leaves. It also has sort of an airy, kind of open growth habit, all right? But it's nice to see the greenery in here. And then this is kind of its cousin. This is the desert Encilia, and this is Encilia farinosa. And farinosa comes from the desert, and it has the gray leaves, and that cuts down on water loss, sun exposure. It still has the yellow, but instead of the dark center, it has a yellow center, okay? So you can plant both of these in the gardens here on the coast, but this one's a little bit more drought tolerant than the Californica, okay? But look at the bloom stalk on this. This looks like a small tree growing out of the heart of this agave. This is a Shaw's agave. And as I say, they have really nasty spines on them. So maybe you wouldn't want to, well, okay, if you want to keep dogs, kids, nosy neighbors out of your yard, maybe you'd want to plant one in a strategic area because it will keep anyone out of the garden. But you don't really want to garden around it because it can really get you, okay? But this is going into bloom, and I want you to remember this bloom stalk, because look at this. It's going to grow up, and this will grow up like 10 feet tall, and then it'll start branching, and it'll flower and set seed, and then this plant, this mother plant, will die because it's reproduced. It only gets one chance in its whole lifetime to reproduce, so it does it in real style, okay? So that's another thing to remember about these plants. They give you a great architectural form, but the bloom is only once at a time. And I'll show you another one later on down here. But these are our salvias, and look at these. This is purple sage. Okay, sages, scientifically, they're called salvias. And salvias, these have gotten a little bit more water, so there's a little bit more leaf color on these. This is a purple sage, and the bloom is sort of between a pink and a purple. They're really pretty. They're spikes, okay? So it's going to come up in a spike, and then it's going to have little flowers on those spikes. And this is a particularly pretty salvia, even though it's water-wise. And if these have little hairs on the leaves, that's one of the they tend to have square stems because they're members of the mint family, and they have little hairs on them. The little hairs give them some kind of sun protection. The other thing they do is when you rub it gently, it leaves a fragrant or scent. These have aromatic oils in them, and those are put on your hands after you've touched them. You've slightly rubbed the leaves or whatever, okay? Supposedly, these also have a bitter taste to them. And so when grazing animals come to take a bite, they associate that bitter taste with the smell. So the next time when they rub up against them, they don't have to eat them because they know it's not going to taste very good. So that's one of the ways that these plants have adapted to protect themselves from being eaten. Some of them produce toxins that are slightly poisonous, which discourage animals from eating them, or even insects from eating them. But other sides, tasting horrible or having prickers and thorns and things like that. So most of these have had some kind of adaptation to keep that going so that they can survive out here. It's not easy surviving 6 months of drought. This is a Baja fairy duster, Caliandra californica. And these are red stamens. Look at that. It's sort of like a fern, like foliage, and then the red stamens. It's a very showy plant and very easy to grow. It tends to grow in this manner. This is a mature plant. I have one at home that I planted with a gray agave, And the gray and the green and the red really look pretty because this will sprawl over the gray agave and really make a spectacular combination. One of the things you might look for when you go to gardens is see what the mature plant looks like. And also, if you can, see how it's planted with other plants, and sometimes you'll have a great combination. Take a picture of it with your phone and then go to a nursery and they can help you get those plants in combination so that you can take them at your own home, okay? This is just, these are new plants, but these are manzanita, okay, or Arctostaphylos, okay? And this is called emerald carpet, and you can see why it's called emerald carpet. This is a ground cover, and so it may only get like 10 inches high or so, but it will be, you know, in other words, it grows out instead of up mainly, and it's doing really well here. But you can tell the new growth because it's that light green, okay? And then the darker, it'll turn darker green. This is going to have little bell-like flowers on it, and then they have little roots. One of the things that manzanita is noted for is it has a smooth, reddish bark. This is called a foxtail agave, and it's called a foxtail agave because instead of this tall, okay, this forms this huge rosette. So this is a structural plant. Remember, agave are only going to bloom once in their lifetime. So it grows for years, and then when it's mature, it will put out a bloom stalk. But instead of putting out a bloom stalk that's going to go straight up and look like a tree, this one's going to curve over like that. And that's why it's called foxtail agave, because the bloom bends over like that. And that means when it's done, this plant, this mother plant, will die. It depends upon which agave you have, how many years that will take, but it tends to be, okay, some of them are called century plants. None of these take 100 years to mature, but some of them may take 20 years or more because they're slow growing and they're a great plant for its shape and size. And then the other thing that this does, if you'll come around here, this has offsets. Look at these plants. Okay, these plants are growing from the stems or roots of these mature agave, and these will be sort of the next generation. These aren't seeds. These are ones that are growing from that mother plant. These will not die. Just the one that's blooming will die. And so you can form a great big clump of these agave. And the only thing that's really sharp on these, the sides are really not much of a problem. The only ones are the terminal spines, and those are sharp. But they're not as nasty as some of the agave, okay? So that completes our tour here in the garden. We have many other plants, but we don't have time to talk about all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. That's so good. So we had a question here, Kay, that's perfect probably for you. California, Steve says, California has the most, so sorry there. California has the most plant extinctions in the US according to, and he gives the resource there. He said, does the San Diego Botanic Garden have threatened, endangered, and critically endangered California natives in their collection? And what are we doing to increase the population and reintroduce them to more protected sites?
Funny he should ask. Tony, who is our horticulturist, is very interested in this. He has gone on plant excursions to try to find endangered plants, bring them back to the garden. We do grow some of them here at the garden. It can be a struggle to keep these alive and also to get them to reproduce. But Tony is very active in this, and he has an active program going on in Encinitas, which is the little community here where the garden is. And what he's trying to do is he's taking over part of a hillside next to the freeway and trying to reintroduce California natives. right now, what they have is a lot of ice plant. An ice plant is a succulent ground cover from Cape South Africa. And so that we've been taking that out, and we've been introducing all kinds of California natives on that hillside. So that's just been started this fall. So we'll see how that goes. But it's one of the things that the garden's actively trying to do. And as I say, we try to grow them in the garden also. But, you know, California may be, and especially the coastal sage scrub that's here on the coast is really in danger. And a lot of that has to do with so much of it's paved over. You know, we have houses, we have shopping malls, we have all kinds of developments sitting on top of it. And so we are trying at the garden to encourage people to plant California natives, at least some of them, in their landscape, so that we can help out the birds and the butterflies and bees and, okay, the rabbits, the gophers, everything.
Yeah, it has been one of our goals for many years, and to further make the importance of that, to further highlight the importance of that goal, Tony, who's been director of horticulture for some years now, his title has actually recently changed to director of conservation horticulture, and so he's currently working on that. And that's a really good question. Are there other questions? I mean, we can stay. I can stay as long as you want, but obviously it's getting later on the East Coast, and Kay says she can. And I don't know, Sarah. I don't know if she's going to go home tonight or not. But are there other questions from you folks? We certainly would be happy to try to answer any questions we are. But conservation is an incredibly important goal for the San Diego Botanic Garden because we live just in this very fragile area of Southern California.
You have a plant that we call it New Jersey tea, but I can't think of the genus for that one, if anybody else can think of it. But it's blue, you have blues and whites, but it's mostly a little blue bottle brush that blooms. And I didn't see you present any of that, but that one blooms a long time. When I was in San Francisco, I saw it blooming in the winter.
He wouldn't mean ceanothus, would he? Would
Yes.
she?
Yes.
Ceanothus?
Yes.
Okay. We call it California lilac because it tends to be sort of a purplish blue or whatever, but it can be white. And that blooms in the spring. Mine's blooming right now. It is an evergreen plant, and it usually has really dark, really lush, dark green foliage. It can be an absolutely beautiful plant to have in the garden. I realize that, you know, you wouldn't be able to grow any of these plants in Virginia because most of them are frost tender, and they are tough plants in terms of not taking much water, but they wouldn't take real cold, no.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that one. Kay and I talked about that very plant this morning because I was asking her about why we planted a particular cultivar, and she says because that's the one that's most easily for home gardeners to grow. But I live in nearby the garden in the hills here, and we have both the white ceanothus and the normal bluish purple ceanothus all over, and I've been waiting really soon to watch ours. I'm a little higher elevation, so I'm waiting to see ours bloom.
Yeah. I think too, people have to remember, you know, things that, like, we can't really grow the redwoods down here. You know, everybody thinks about the California redwoods, and they do great around San Francisco and Northern California, but we don't have enough moisture in terms of fog, and just, they get a lot more rain too. Even Los Angeles gets more rain than we do. I mean, and they're only, what, 100 miles from here? So well, we get 4 weather reports a day because that's what San Diego, we've got the coast, we have inland, we have mountain, and we have desert. So everybody gets 4 weather reports every time they have the weather report.
So, when you're showing California natives in the San Diego, those are for Southern. I mean, California is a huge state.
Yes.
So
well, and this goes all the way to the border up there in Oregon. It goes down in Baja and it goes all the way up to Oregon. But along that, you get different plants.
But there are plants that you grow in San Diego. There's no way you
Yes.
could grow them in Northern California. But aren't
Yeah.
aren't some of those hardy? Those because I've been looking at them. Those ones that are akin to our New Jersey tea. I can't. Some of them look like they could be hardy, like they were more Northern California plants.
Well, I'm trying to think of one that we do get. Mahonia is one of those that does a little bit better in Northern California, and we can grow it down here. And we get a Western redbud, which is deciduous, but it deals with the drought that we have. Because as I say, we have basically 6 months at least of no rain.
Barb,
So these plants, they're tough. They're tough.
Barb just posted to the group that Ceanothus americanus is hardy for us, meaning the New Jersey tea that you mentioned is hardy for you all there.
Oh,
and our species here
Okay.
grows, I don't know how far north, I'm assuming quite a ways, but clearly Southern California is sort of I think the gold mine for plants. So we can grow so many plants from all these Mediterranean regions around the world. And then if we irrigate, we can grow plants from all these other temperate areas around the world. So we rarely have a freeze. The year I moved down to Southern California from Northern California, we had the 100-year freeze and everyone's banana plants died, which meant they just sprouted up the next spring.
I was gonna say they just died to the ground. They came back
Yeah,
up.
yeah, they didn't really die. So it's like, yeah, so it's really pretty amazing.
Could I ask a question? I wondered
Sure.
if the Proteaceae we were shown, are they all evergreen there?
Yes,
Yeah.
they are.
And in their
They-
home country too?
I believe so. And so, because the thing that they have in common is the climate.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to freeze either. And we can get it down into the 30s. And some of these plants will make it into like the high 20s.
Yes.
I know, I was thinking though, if it's so dry, I thought they might lose their leaves as protection.
Well, our things, okay, your trees lose their leaves in the wintertime because they cannot take up enough water and nutrients to support their leaves in the wintertime. Well, our plants lose their leaves in the summertime because they cannot take up enough water and nutrients to keep their leaves going.
Yeah, so they're not evergreen.
A lot of the plants, but then the ones that I talked about on the film, they are evergreen because I was talking about those in October and we hadn't had any rain since early April or
Okay.
whatever.
I just thought in general, I wasn't sure if the Proteaceae were in general evergreen or not.
Yeah. The other thing is our garden and even our native plant area does get some irrigation.
Yeah.
Because people don't want to come to see dead looking plants.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the truth.
Yeah.
And actually we water a little bit, maybe more than we used to, because one of our horticulturists that we had before went up to the Huntington, which is a very famous botanical garden in Los Angeles. And he wanted to know why their desert garden looked so much better than ours. And it's because they water occasionally.
Yeah, indeed. And because of, again, our climate and irrigating some of the things that would normally need more water, and most of that is recycled. However, we do have plants that don't tolerate the higher salt content within our recycled water. But we have about 5,000 plant species in the San Diego Botanic Garden, which makes it one of the top gardens as far as diversity in the United States, which we're really proud of. So we can show you, we even have our own rainforest garden.
Our version of a rainforest.
Our version of the rainforest, indeed.
Okay, but what's your source for water so you don't have chlorine or anything else?
Well, we use, the city water system and some of the recycled. So, yeah.
We do have a reverse osmosis. We have a new conservatory that opened to the public a year ago. That's our tropical plant collection. And the things we can't grow outside here because of our normally wonderful weather, It's right now 59 degrees and I'm already starting to get cold, but I know that's a little warmer than you are. But our conservatory has reverse osmosis purified water because many of the plants in there are indeed rainforest canopy plants that only get pure rainwater. And so that area is specifically watered with reverse osmosis purified water. So, but other parts of the garden, again, either are local tap water or a recycled water. Any other questions?
No, we appreciate this. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Well, we really hope you've enjoyed this time. Thank you. Thank you. I see some,
And come see us.
Please come see us. It's a fabulous place to visit. And again, we've been open all through COVID and we've been very safe. And it's been very popular because, again, it's one of the few places it can go. But we have 2 children's gardens. We have, I don't even know what, is it 29 themed gardens in our Botanic garden, including the largest collection of bamboo, public collection of bamboo in the United States, a number of succulent collections, plants from Australia, from South Africa, from Chile. I mean, it's just an amazing garden, which is why I'm happy to be there all the time. So if there's other questions, then on behalf of Kay and Mo that you didn't get to actually meet, and Sarah, thank you so very much for visiting with us this evening. And we look forward to seeing you again. We have a number of videos that are available. You can contact Sarah and or Karen to talk about those. We realize that there are different plants than what you have, but we're happy to do this again. We would love to host it again. So
Thank you.
thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hi, Sarah.
Bye. Thank you, Kay,
Bye.
Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.